Behind me is a 1968 Mazda Cosmo. It's actually not the first Mazda and it's not the first rotary powered car, but it is an incredibly important car for Mazda and the rotary engine as we know it today. The Cosmo debuted in 1964 at the same motor show that the Porsche 911 debuted at. Of course, back then it was called the Porsche 901, but the fact is that it debuted into a world absolutely hungry for the rotary engine. The first ever rotary production car, the NSU Spider, debuted just a couple months before, but that was a single rotor, basically a proof of concept. This was the world's first twin rotor, and it was a bona fide GT sports car, basically showing the world that Mazda and the rotary engine were a serious factor. They made two different versions of the Mazda Cosmo, the S1 and the S2. They were made from 1964 to 1972. This is an S2, which means under the hood, we have an L10B rotary engine. It's got two rotors, it displaces 982 cc's, and it makes 128 horsepower. But the big thing is the way it makes that power. It loves to rev. It just kind of hums its way up to red line, and if the tach didn't say 6,000, 7,000 RPM, you would have no other indication that the engine is spinning that quickly. It's just a smooth, turbine-like power delivery. I say that, but I've never driven a turbine car. The point is that this engine made enough power to get this car to 60 miles an hour in under 9 seconds and a top speed of 115 miles an hour. But beyond just the mechanicals, look at it. The styling was done in-house by Mazda stylists, and you have to say the result is very Japanese. They actually originally planned to do a convertible and a coupe, which is why the roof line looks a little bit like a hardtop from a convertible sports car. That's because the original convertible version was supposed to use that as a lift-off roof panel. The convertible version eventually ended up being scrapped. We only got the coupe with this very unique roofline. The styling elements in the car are just so fun. I like these slanted vents behind the front wheel to exhaust engine heat. I love the jet exhaust inspired rear tail lights. And I really just like the small, compact shape of it. Now, as you can see by me standing next to it, it's not a big car, but at the time it had a pretty big price tag. Adjusted for US dollars at the time, it was $4,100, which is about as much as a fully loaded Pontiac GTO. They didn't sell very many of these at all. They made 343 Series 1 cars and 833 Series 2. So in total, 1,176 plus some prototypes here and there. It's a very uniquely styled car, and if you've never had a chance to see this styling in person, it's because there's very, very few of these in North America, perhaps less than 10. This car was imported by A Collection Auto here in Toronto, where it is also for sale. But it's a rare chance to be able to drive one of these on North American turf, so let's hop in the right seat and hit the road. All right, you join me inside the Mazda Cosmo, one of the most legendary cars from the classic era of Japan. And look at this dashboard. How cool is this? To me, it reminds me of like an airplane. You have this flat black panel, you have all these no-nonsense white labels, except you have fun things like this map light. Check that out, and it moves too, like on a little swivel, so your co-pilot can read the map. You have, of course, these amazing houndstooth seats and this big classic steering wheel in front of you. Now, the ergonomics of this car are strange in every single area. For example, the wheel is basically centered under my left knee, my left leg. My feet are on the pedals now. So it's this big wheel, it's basically in your lap. Not only is it off center, but it's also like at an angle. It comes out like this. I can reach it, it's a beautiful wood. It's really weird. The pedal box is, pretty normal for a car of this size, but this car is not roomy in here. My head is pretty much on the ceiling. I'm like 5'9", and to stick my head out the window, I gotta go like that. So it's actually not a big car. You don't have a lot of room in it, despite the fact that you might think you do. But inside, it is such a time capsule of the 1960s. I love all the finishes. I love the huge gauges you get. I like that all these switches, like a lot of these are like unlabeled. Like this one just says C. What is C? We don't know. But it's just an amazing place to sit. But enough of that. Let me show you now what it's like to drive. So this one is a little louder than stock. It's fitted with a stainless steel exhaust, which is aftermarket, but you still get that classic rotary sound. And the tachometer is redlined at 7,000 RPM because it's a rotary. They love to rev, so let's let it breathe. You need to have plenty of revs on the counter before you pull away. There's not a lot of torque down low in this car. I mean, it displaces just over a liter, just under a liter, so you gotta be pretty judicious with the revs. Sometimes the gears are a little hard to find because the 4-speed gate isn't exactly straight. It's actually kind of curved in a parallel pattern like a Beetle. But use that shifter, which is nice and positive. You get a 5-speed, and you're rewarded with that glorious rotary sound. Now, what does this car feel like that you might have driven? Well, in a way, it feels like a weird mix between like an MGB and a 911. The steering is rack and pinion. It's so direct. It feels like that classic direct MG steering. But then you get this soundtrack that's like nothing else you can buy. Those two rotors just singing away, powering us up the hill. It's not a fast car, but it's quick. I mean, when was the last time you heard something sound like that? Now, the ride is actually pretty good because this uses a détient rear suspension. So it's like a solid axle, but it also has an independently hung rear differential. It's a super weird design that very few cars have ever used, but it works well here. Your view down the hood, well, it's just beautiful. You get these two flowing fenders in front of you. I'm in this glassy cockpit. It's a really good view, except I'm really up high in it. As you can see, my head's basically on the ceiling here. But it is a GT car, really. It's not a hardcore sports car, and you realize that when you drive for a little bit. This isn't one of the cars that you just, drive the hell out of. This is a GT car, truly. So when it was new, this car was the pinnacle of Japanese performance. Remember in 1968, the Skyline GTR was still a year away. It hadn't existed yet. It wasn't a thought in anyone's mind. This and the 2000 GT were the kings of speed in Japan. Now, when it was new, this car didn't cost as much as a 2000 GT, and maybe it was a little overshadowed by it, honestly. I mean, this car is such a piece of history. It's so integral to the Mazda story, to the rotary story, because this is the car that made the world take both of them seriously. I like the NSU Wankel Spider, but when that came out, it was an oddity, a curiosity. This was a real car. This could do over 120 miles per hour. It made the world take notice of this funny little car company called Mazda, who had before only made 3-wheeled utility trucks and tiny little affordable K cars. But this was a premier product from the company, really their first try to make a sports car, and they nailed it. But lead it into those corners, let the détient suspension work its magic. It's amazing. Just feel it coming through the corners. It's alive. Once you get used to the entirely strange seating position, it's really a breeze to drive, and it is so, so rewarding. What more could you want? We're doing 4,000 RPM right now, and it just doesn't even care. So there you have it. That's what it's like to drive a Mazda Cosmo, the car that made rotaries and made Mazda a real thing. For Driving.ca, I'm Clayton Seams. For more classic car reviews, don't forget to check out our website where you'll also find a full written article on this car.